Greetings. This is Robbie, Nostalgia Catholic, with my next Isaac Asimov story to see publication. In this case, it is the robot story Reason, the first robot story that Asimov did sell to John Campbell at Astounding Science Fiction. So, Reason is also one of the 9 stories, 8 in Astounding plus the one in Astonishing, Strange Playfellow, or Robbie that we already covered, to appear in the iRobot collection. And on account of that, once again, there's actually a number of textual changes. Let's get through some of that first. The main differences really amount to adding specific stuff about the laws of robotics. So let's just see here. We have a little blurb on the table of contents. There it is, Isaac Asimov, Reason by Isaac Asimov. The little blurb says, "The robot accepted nothing he couldn't prove, which very reasonably made the men inferior beings." Interesting. Okay. Another blurb here. "The robot was strictly logical, reasoning as only a perfect machine mind could, from observed facts to inevitable and wacky conclusions." And we have here one picture associated with this story. Now, it took a little while to figure it out. Powell is the one in the background with the mustache, and Mike Donovan's the one in the foreground. You can see there's one robot laid out on a table while another in the background is kind of sitting down watching. The one sitting down is our problematic robot, which these two guys are at one point of the story in the process of showing how they put together a robot to show we made you. So, and that really, well, we'll get back to that in a moment. First, because they had to add some stuff, well, let's start with what was added. At the very beginning, there's a little bit of tie-in with the whole Susan Calvin and other narrative to kind of weave these together. So we have all this. Half a year later, the boys had changed their minds. The flame of a giant sun had given way to the soft blackness of space, but external variations mean little in the business of checking the workings of experimental robots. Whatever the background, one is face to face with an inscrutable positronic brain, which the slide rule geniuses say should work thus and so. Except they don't. Powell and Donovan found that out after they had been on the station less than 2 weeks. Gregory Powell spaced his words for emphasis, and that's the first sentence in the story is published. So everything before that last sentence was added. Next notable change, just a couple paragraphs in from the beginning. We have this, Powell repressed a sudden attack of nerves. These robots possessed peculiar brains. Okay, now in the old one it says, the positronic paths impressed upon them were calculated in advance, and all possible permutations that might lead to anger or hate were rigidly excluded. And yet the QT models were the first of their kind, and this was the first of the QTs. Anything could happen. So that gets replaced with, the 3 laws of robotics held. They had to. All of U.S. robots, from Robertson himself to the new floor sweeper, would insist on that. So QT1 was safe, and yet the QT models were the first of their kind, and this was the first of the QTs. Mathematical squiggles on paper were not always the most comforting protection against robotic fact. So you see, he kind of, the same basic idea, but he wove in the fact that there's a first law, they're safe. And then a little later on page 39, I'll have another example with the second law. The third doesn't really seem to come in very much. So I'm going to compare that with, it's on page 55. Okay, now on here, Donovan snarled, "Wait till we get back to base. Someone's going to pay for this. Those robots are guaranteed to be subordinate. So they are, to their blasted master. They'll obey, all right, but not necessarily us. Say, do you know what's going to happen to us when we get back to base? Now let's look what happened with that. Those robots. Okay, wait till we get back to base. Someone's going to pay for this. Those robots must obey us. It's the second law. See, we brought that in. What's the use of saying that? They aren't obeying us. And there's probably some reason for that we'll figure out with too late. There isn't, but we'll go on. By the way, do you know what's going to happen to us when we get back to base? There it continues the same. There's one other small thing towards the end, which again is mostly just to kind of prepare us and stitch it into the next story in the book. Okay, I'll just compare one against the other, and there'll be one other thing, and then I'll launch into my thoughts about the story itself as a story. Okay, towards the end, last few paragraphs. Hal lingered. How's Earth? So they're about to get the ride home, and their relief has arrived, and they're welcome the relief to the station. Okay, so he says, how's Earth? It was a conventional enough question, and Muller, one of the relief people, gave the conventional answer, still spinning. Now, originally it was, he was donning the heavy space gloves in preparation for his term of duty here. And so, well, we have a little addition here. And it goes like this. After still spinning, Hal said, good. Muller looked at him. The boys back at the U.S. robots have dreamed up a new one, by the way. A multiple robot. The one that's in Catch That Rabbit, by the way, which is the next story in High Robot. Not the next story he published, however. What I said. There's a big contract for it. It must be just the thing for asteroid mining. You have a master robot with 6 sub-robots under it. Like your fingers. Has it been field tested? Asked Powell anxiously. Muller smiled. Waiting for you, I hear. Powell's fists balled. Damn it, we need a vacation. Oh, you'll get it. 2 weeks, I think. And then he was donning the heavy space gloves in preparation. Okay, so at the end. There's a few other differences like that. Whole explanation, for example, at one point of why robots would be shipped into space as pieces and assembled on site, which was not in the original. Reasonable edition, I guess. And one other rather anomalous change. For some reason, in the original, Earth is 5 billion people. Okay. But in the revised iRobot version, Earth has 3 billion people. Considering that both those figures are now obsolete, I'm not sure it makes a difference, but I kind of have to wonder, why is that changed? I mean, at least when Harry Seldon's computer calculated that Trantor would be in ruins originally within 500 years, and then in view of the story of how it actually unfolded, it would in fact be ruined inside of 300 years, so they changed that. I don't know. That one I can at least kind of understand the change. This one is just, why did the Earth go from 5 billion people to 3 billion people? I don't know. Well, enough of all those. What about the story itself? So, for some, and I have to say this, it is irrational. The robots, well, part of it's the fault of the robots. They're cooking up a whole religion. Who told them that there was such a thing as a religion? Who told them about there's a master and I am the prophet of the master and all this kind of stuff? Who told them that stuff? Where did they get that? And yet that's what it is. This robot is the prophet. And the master is some ill-defined being that they can't define or anything or say where he lives or anything about him, really. And, of course, the whole point of the story is even though these robots are filled with some very bizarre ideas, somehow it doesn't really affect their ability to do the job they're supposed to do, which has something to do with collecting this vast amount of energy from sunlight in space and focusing it all into a very tight beam at some point on the Earth where there's a receiving station designed to handle all that energy and convey it to the rest of the Earth. Solar power on a grand scale, and without a zillion solar cells that have to be replaced all the time. So that's actually kind of a neat idea. Perhaps one day there may be something like that. But the robots have the job of keeping that beam focused. And now there's a storm blowing through that's going to make everything jump around like a flea on a hot plate. And somehow the robot's going to have to try to keep that beam centered because if it doesn't, it can do serious damage. It is some seriously concentrated solar energy. So, but they keep it all flawlessly, is the upshot of it all. And they're able to do this despite all their crazy beliefs. I don't know. I guess the idea is that we observe that people can more or less function at specific jobs despite what kind of stuff fills their brains, You believe the truth, you believe the law, you believe in God, you don't believe in God, you this or that. If you can at least do the job, and if you can't, you won't be employed very long anyway. What difference does all that make to the employer who just needs you to do the job, and what else you got going on in your head is your own business. And I think that's kind of the idea. The robots may have crazy ideas, and they are crazy. The robots seem to think that the humans will be destroyed when their service is up. The master will delete your existence, and no, we're going to go back to Earth where all our fellow people are. Well, it's nice that you believe that. I can see why the master gives you this delusion so that you won't be afraid of what's actually going to happen to you. It's all this weird stuff. There's a little bit at the beginning that really makes me wonder. At one point, you look out and you see some stars. And what does the robot say? Oh, well, there's a black surface right on the other side of this glass with little dots on it. And it's like, well, no, you're looking out at space and there's all those stars. Now, it seems to me that the one thing our two characters, Powell and Donovan, they seem awful, like these guys don't understand the three laws. I'm sorry, but they don't. And apparently, to some degree, neither do the robot. Because the second law says you have to obey humans. You may not be able to understand why you feel this weird compulsion to do what the human tells you to do. You may invent all kinds of bizarre theories as to why this strange and maybe unfathomable detail is in your makeup. But it's there, and you can't resist it as a robot. The human tells you, let me go, you let him go. And yet, that doesn't happen here. And it's not a matter of one human saying one thing and another human saying a contrary thing. That could get a little complicated for the second law. Okay, which human do I obey? This one tells me to let him go. This one tells me not to let him go. What do I do? What do I do? But that complication doesn't even arise here. The only two humans present are in absolute agreement. When they say let us go or let me go, they mean that. They both mean it. The human direction, the second law, is clear and unambiguous. The robot has been ordered to let them go, and they don't. So I don't know. Well, they're obeying this mysterious master, which, by the way, has never spoken to them or given them any, anything at all to any reason to believe such a thing. So I find a lot of that kind of incomprehensible, really. So, I guess you could say it gets a sort of religion or something, but not any, reasonable or sensible religion, and certainly not one with any known or valid historical basis, just one apparently cooked up out of thin air for no particular reason. So, it's a curious story, and it was an early attempt, and it was kind of fun watching these robots, be able to explain everything away. Because look, instead of just targeting, look, I'm telling you, those dots are big burning balls of gas, billions and billions of miles away. Yeah, with you, Pumbaa, everything's gas. Disney joke I thought I'd throw in, but it would have been a simple thing to show these are not dots on a piece of black material right behind this glass. Observe the parallax. How do you explain the parallax? Namely, that they must be incredibly distant. They never tried to bring a little bit of objectivity. Okay, why are you so certain that flesh and blood creatures like ourselves can't make machines like yourself? I mean, obviously we can assemble it. There's no reason we couldn't somewhere else make this part and that part and this part and that part the same way that you saw us take these parts and assemble them together into another robot. Okay. They didn't reason. It's more like just said, yeah, you better, I'm telling you, I'm going to knock your block off kind of stuff. It's like, like threats? Robots don't understand threats. It's just, that is not a credible statement. I will disregard. That would be the proper And in fact, the robots do pretty much disregard the threat. So, at least I got that straight. So it was kind of an interesting story, and obviously it's the third story that Campbell published of his, and now finally he's beginning to build up this series that's going to turn into something. The robot series and iRobot, other robot stories that come after, the robot novels, and lots of adventures with robots that he would go on to write about in the years to come. So this was a very big deal. And in a way, almost is more founded here than in that first story of Strange Playfellow / Robbie that went way back there, and up until this came along, could have been properly seen as a one-shot and not intended to have a series based on it. But now we get the beginnings of a series, and interestingly, the sequel to its first story is in Astounding Science Fiction, and so will all its further sequels, other than a few that he doesn't intend to be taken seriously. He'll put one in Amazing Stories, another one in one of the other magazines. It wasn't really intended even as a robot story, and finally another one which is practically a joke more than anything else, surfaced in some whole other magazine in the 1950s. So, but everything else, from basically Robbie clear up to the inevitable conflict in 1950, is going to be, except for those other three stories I just mentioned, all of those will go into his first collection book, iRobot, these fix-it books that become kind of a thing. Well, I think that's enough on that. Thank you for listening, and again, I conclude with my review. Unfortunately, I noticed that Asimov's name or story have no presence on the cover of the magazine. This is it right here. You have now seen the actual publication of it as originally existing in the reading public. Thank you.